At 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, Sarah Martinez was serving coffee and checking seatbelts like any other Tuesday. Passengers saw her warm smile, her gentle way with crying babies, and her patient explanations about turbulence. What they didn't see was the way her eyes continuously scanned for threats, how her trained hands could neutralize an attacker in seconds, or that beneath her crisp airline uniform lay the muscle memory of a woman who had once been one of the military's most lethal operatives. When three armed hijackers stormed the cockpit of Flight 447 that October evening, they expected panic from crew. They expected compliance from the passengers. What they got instead was something that would make international headlines and change aviation security forever. Because sometimes the most dangerous person on a plane isn't the one you'd expect. Sometimes she's the one asking if you'd like cream with your coffee. This is the true story of Sarah Martinez, the flight attendant who wasn't just serving meals, she was serving justice. Sarah Martinez had perfected the art of being invisible. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun, she blended seamlessly into the background of commercial aviation. Passengers rarely looked twice at her as she demonstrated safety procedures or wheeled the beverage cart down narrow aisles. To them, she was just another friendly face in the sky, someone whose biggest responsibility was ensuring their tray tables were in the upright position. They had no idea they were looking at a woman who could kill with her bare hands. The transformation from Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, United States Army Special Forces, to Sarah Martinez, friendly neighborhood flight attendant, hadn't been easy. 5 years had passed since she'd hung up her combat boots, but the skills remained sharp as ever. Every morning, she still woke at 0500 hours. Every evening, she still did her physical training routine in her small Chicago apartment. And every single day, she fought the urge to scan every room like the potential battlefield it could become. Her colleagues at Midwest Airlines knew nothing about her past. To them, she was the quiet one who never complained about difficult passengers, who somehow always seemed to know exactly what to do in emergencies, and who had an uncanny ability to spot trouble before it started. They attributed it to good instincts. Sarah knew better. The day everything changed started like any other. Sarah arrived at O'Hare International Airport at 6 a.m. for the pre-flight briefing. Flight 447 to Los Angeles was a routine Tuesday evening departure. Nothing unusual about the manifest or the crew assignment. Captain James Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran pilot, nodded his greeting. First Officer Lisa Chun was reviewing weather reports. The other flight attendants, Maria Santos and David Kim, were going through their usual checklist. Sarah listened to the briefing with half her attention while the other half automatically cataloged exits, noted the positioning of emergency equipment, and mentally mapped the aircraft layout. It was a Boeing 737, single-aisle, 150 passengers. She could navigate it blindfolded if necessary, though she hoped it would never come to that. Boarding began at 7 p.m. Sarah watched each passenger as they entered, a habit she'd never been able to shake. The businessman in 4, it looked stressed but harmless. The family with young children in rows 12 through 14 were clearly excited about their vacation. The elderly couple in 8C and 8D held hands as they found their seats, celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary with a trip to see their grandchildren. But it was the 3 men in 18A, 18B, and 20F that made Sarah's internal alarm system start humming. They'd boarded separately, hadn't acknowledged each other, but something about their body language set her on edge. The way the man in 18A's eyes swept the cabin wasn't the casual curiosity of a nervous flyer. It was reconnaissance. The man in 18B kept checking his watch, not in the impatient way of someone worried about departure time, but with the precision of someone working to a schedule. And the third man in 20F had positioned himself with a clear view of both the cockpit door and the emergency exits. These observations accumulated in Sarah's mind like pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to complete. She moved through the cabin, serving drinks and snacks, her smile never wavering even as her senses remained on high alert. When she reached row 18, The man in the aisle seat looked up at her with cold, calculating eyes. "Just water," he said in accented English. She noticed the slight bulge under his jacket, positioned exactly where someone might conceal a weapon. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Colorado Rockies, Sarah was collecting trash in the forward galley when she heard the unmistakable sound of the cockpit door being forced open. The sound that every flight crew member had been trained to fear, the sound that meant their worst nightmare was beginning. She dropped the trash bag and moved toward the sound, her body automatically shifting into combat mode. The cheerful flight attendant persona fell away like a discarded costume. In its place stood someone who had spent 8 years in some of the world's most dangerous places, someone who had been trained by the best to handle exactly this type of situation. The first thing she saw was Captain Rodriguez on the floor, blood trickling from a head wound. First Officer Chun was being held at gunpoint by the man from 18A, who now had a pistol pressed against her neck. The man from 18B was attempting to access the flight controls while the third hijacker stood guard at the cockpit entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," the gunman's voice crackled over the intercom system. "This aircraft is now under our control. Remain in your seats, and no one will be harmed." Sarah pressed herself against the galley wall, her mind racing through options. 3 armed men, at least 1 firearm confirmed, cockpit compromised, passengers in danger. In her former life, she would have had backup, superior firepower, and intelligence about the enemy. Here, she had nothing but her training, her experience, and the element of surprise that came from being drastically underestimated. The man at the cockpit door was giving orders to his accomplices in what sounded like Arabic, but Sarah's attention was focused on his positioning. He was standing with his back partially turned to her, confident that a flight attendant posed no threat. His weapon was visible in his right hand, held low but ready. She calculated distance, angle of approach, probable response time. From the passenger cabin came the sounds of panic. Children crying, adults shouting questions, the chaos that the hijackers were counting on to maintain control. But chaos could also provide cover for someone who knew how to use it. Sarah took a deep breath and began to move. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to close the distance without alerting her target. Her 8 years of Special Forces training had taught her that violence, when necessary, had to be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. There was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. The hijacker was still focused on the cockpit when Sarah reached striking distance. She could see the tension in his shoulders, hear his breathing, smell his nervous sweat. In that moment, she thought about all the passengers behind her, about the children who deserved to see their families again, about the elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. Then she moved. Her first strike disabled his weapon hand, the carefully placed blow causing him to drop the gun as his fingers went numb. Her second strike, delivered before he could even register the first, sent him crashing into the cockpit wall. By the time his accomplices realized something was wrong, Sarah already had his weapon and a human shield. "Everybody freeze," she shouted, her voice carrying an authority that made both hijackers hesitate. This wasn't the voice of a flight attendant asking if they wanted peanuts. This was the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. The hijacker holding First Officer Chun spun toward her, his weapon now trained on Sarah instead. "Drop the gun, or I kill the pilot." Sarah's mind calculated angles and probabilities. The man was using Chun as a shield, but his positioning left his right shoulder exposed. At this distance, with this weapon, she could make the shot. But the risk to Chun was significant, and there was still a third hijacker unaccounted for. "You don't want to do this," Sarah said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Release the pilot, and we can talk." "You drop your weapon now," the hijacker screamed, pressing his gun harder against Chen's head. "I will kill her." That's when Sarah heard the sound she'd been dreading, footsteps behind her. The third hijacker was coming up from the passenger cabin, probably armed, definitely hostile. In seconds, she would be caught between 2 weapons with nowhere to go. Time slowed the way it always had in combat. Sarah's training took over completely. overriding conscious thought with pure instinct. She dove to the right, rolling behind the limited cover of the galley counter as gunshots exploded in the confined space. The sound was deafening, but she could hear screaming from the passenger cabin, could hear First Officer Chun shouting for everyone to get down. From her position, Sarah could see the legs of the hijacker who had been holding Chun. The pilot had broken free during the confusion and was pressed against the far wall of the cockpit. The immediate threat was the man now advancing down the aisle toward her position, weapon drawn, murder in his eyes. Sarah had been in firefights before, but never at 35,000 feet in a pressurized tube full of innocent civilians. Every shot risked hitting a passenger. Every move risked catastrophic decompression. She needed to end this quickly and quietly, which meant getting close enough to use her hands instead of the gun. The advancing hijacker was being cautious, checking corners, moving with the discipline of someone with military training. But he was also operating under the assumption that he was dealing with a flight attendant who had gotten lucky. He had no idea he was hunting a predator who had been trained to kill by some of the best warriors in the world. Sarah waited until he was 3 steps past her position before she moved. Her attack came from his blind spot, low and fast, designed to disable rather than kill. She needed information, needed to know if there were more hijackers, needed to understand their plan. The fight was brutal and brief. The hijacker was skilled, but Sarah had advantages he couldn't have anticipated. She knew how to fight in confined spaces, how to use an opponent's momentum against them, how to inflict maximum damage with minimal movement. When it was over, he was unconscious and secured with zip ties from the emergency kit. 2 down, 1 to go. The remaining hijacker in the cockpit was screaming threats over the intercom, ordering her to surrender or he would crash the plane. Sarah knew he was probably bluffing. Hijackers typically wanted to get somewhere, not die in a fireball, but she also knew that desperate men made dangerous choices. She needed a plan that would neutralize the final threat without risking the aircraft or the passengers. The cockpit door was designed to be impregnable from the outside, but Sarah had noticed that the hijackers had left it propped open when they first entered. That oversight might be their downfall. Moving carefully, she approached the cockpit entrance. Inside, she could see the remaining hijacker holding a knife to Captain Rodriguez's throat while trying to figure out the flight controls. He was panicked now, his carefully laid plans falling apart, which made him even more dangerous. "This is your last chance," he shouted when he saw her. "Stay back, or I kill the captain." Sarah raised her hands, the confiscated pistol clearly visible. "I'm going to set this down," she said calmly. "Then, we want to talk." She placed the weapon on the floor and kicked it away, a gesture of apparent surrender that caused the hijacker to relax slightly. That moment of reduced tension was all she needed. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the emergency fire extinguisher from its mount and hurled it at the hijacker's head. The impact sent him staggering, his grip on the captain loosening just enough for Rodriguez to break free. Sarah was already moving, covering the distance to the hijacker in 2 quick steps. Her final takedown was clean and efficient, leaving the man unconscious but alive. The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of the engines and the captain's heavy breathing. Outside the windows, the lights of Denver were visible far below, a reminder that despite everything that had just happened, they were still flying, still alive, still heading home. "Jesus Christ," Captain Rodriguez whispered, staring at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. "Who the hell are you?" Sarah looked down at her rumpled uniform, at the blood on her hands, at the 3 unconscious hijackers who had thought they could take control of her aircraft. She thought about the passengers who were probably terrified, about the explanation she would have to give, about the life she had tried so hard to leave behind. "I'm a flight attendant," she said quietly, "and I think we need to make an announcement to the passengers." The passenger cabin had erupted into chaos. Screams echoed through the aircraft as people processed what they had just witnessed. Some passengers were crying, others were trying to use their cell phones despite being at cruising altitude, and a few were attempting to get out of their seats to see what was happening in the forward galley. Sarah knew she had to regain control of the situation before panic spread further. Her military training had taught her that in crisis situations, people look for leadership, for someone who appeared calm and competent. Right now, that person had to be her. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats immediately," she announced over the intercom, her voice steady and authoritative. "The situation has been contained. I repeat, the threat has been neutralized and the aircraft is secure." But even as she spoke, Sarah could see the doubt and fear in the passengers' eyes. They had watched their mild-mannered flight attendant transform into something they didn't recognize, had seen violence they never expected at 35,000 feet. The woman who had been offering them pretzels an hour ago had just single-handedly taken down 3 armed hijackers. Maria Santos and David Kim, her fellow flight attendants, stared at her with expressions of shock and confusion. Maria's hands were shaking as she tried to help calm the passengers, while David seemed frozen in place, unable to process what he had witnessed. "Sarah," Maria whispered when she got close enough. What just happened? You moved like you've done this before." Sarah met her colleague's eyes and saw the question that Maria was afraid to ask directly. "Who are you really?" The truth was complicated, and this wasn't the time or place for explanations. Right now, she needed to focus on getting everyone safely on the ground. "We need to secure the hijackers and tend to Captain Rodriguez," Sarah said, avoiding the bigger question. "David, I need you to find something to properly restrain these men. Maria, check on the passengers, especially the children. They're going to be traumatized." Captain Rodriguez was already back in his seat, running through emergency protocols while First Officer Chen assisted him. The captain's head wound wasn't serious, but Sarah could see he was shaken. In 20 years of flying, he had never faced anything like this. "We need to divert to Denver," Rodriguez said, his training overriding his shock. "I have to report this to air traffic control and get FBI and medical personnel standing by." "Understood," Sarah replied. "What do you need from me?" "Right now, I need you to help keep those passengers calm while we handle the approach. But after we land," he looked at her with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. "After we land, I think you and I need to have a very long conversation." Sarah nodded and returned to the cabin. The hijackers were secured and unconscious, but the passengers were still deeply unsettled. She could hear fragments of conversation as people tried to make sense of what they had seen. "Did you see how she moved? It was like watching a movie. Where did she learn to fight like that? Flight attendant training doesn't cover hand-to-hand combat. My God, she probably saved all our lives." Those men had guns. In row 12, the family with young children was clustered together, the parents trying to shield their kids from the full reality of what had just occurred. The youngest, a boy who couldn't have been more than 6, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes as she passed. "Are the bad men gone?" he asked in a small voice. Sarah knelt down to his level, her expression gentle. "Yes, sweetheart. The bad men can't hurt anyone now. We're all safe, and we're going to land soon so you can see your family." The boy's mother looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know who you are or how you did what you did, but thank you for protecting my children." It was then that Sarah felt the full weight of what had just occurred. These people, these innocent families and business travelers and elderly couples had been in mortal danger. The hijackers' intentions were still unclear, but the weapons and their coordinated approach suggested something far worse than a simple robbery or kidnapping attempt. As she moved through the cabin, checking on passengers and try to restore some sense of normalcy, Sarah's mind was already working ahead to what would come next. Landing in Denver meant federal investigators, extensive questioning, media attention. Her carefully constructed new life, the anonymity she had worked so hard to build, was about to be shattered. The elderly couple in row 8 beckoned her over. The husband, his hair completely white and his hands weathered from decades of honest work, grabbed her hand as she approached. "Young lady," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "my wife and I have been married for 50 years. We've seen a lot in our time, but we've never seen courage like what you just showed. You risked your life for all of us." His wife nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Our granddaughter is meeting us at the airport in Los Angeles. Because of you, we're going to see her again." Sarah felt a tightness in her throat. This was exactly why she had left the military. She was tired of violence, tired of having to hurt people, even when it was necessary. She had wanted a quiet life, a job where her biggest worry would be running out of coffee or dealing with turbulence. But as she looked at these faces, at these people who were alive because she had been there, she realized that perhaps her past wasn't something to run from. Perhaps it was something that had prepared her for exactly this moment. 30 minutes later, the lights of Denver International Airport came into view. Captain Rodriguez had done an excellent job communicating with air traffic control, and Sarah could see the emergency vehicles already positioned on the runway. Ambulances, fire trucks, and what looked like a small army of federal agents. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," Rodriguez announced. "We are beginning our final approach into Denver International Airport. Due to the incident during our flight, we will be met by federal authorities and medical personnel. Please remain in your seats until instructed otherwise, and follow all directions from the crew and law enforcement." Sarah strapped herself into the jump seat, watching through the window as the ground rushed up to meet them. The landing was smooth, textbook perfect, but she could feel the tension in the cabin as passengers realized their ordeal wasn't quite over yet. The moment the aircraft came to a stop, the boarding door opened and FBI agents flooded in. They moved with military precision, securing the unconscious hijackers and beginning the process of interviewing witnesses. Sarah found herself surrounded by agents who clearly had no idea what to make of her. "Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, FBI," said a woman who appeared to be in charge. "I need to speak with you immediately about what occurred on this flight." "Of course," Sarah replied. "But first, can we make sure the passengers are taken care of? Some of them are pretty shaken up, especially the children." Agent Walsh nodded. "Medical personnel are standing by, and we have counselors here to help anyone who needs support. Right now, I need to understand exactly what happened up there and how you were able to neutralize 3 armed men by yourself." Sarah had been dreading this moment since the first hijacker had fallen. She knew that any investigation would quickly reveal her military background, her special forces training, her classified service record. The quiet life she had built was about to become very public. "It's a long story," she said simply. "We have time," Agent Walsh replied. "And frankly, after what the passengers and crew have told me, I'm very interested in hearing it." As Sarah was escorted off the aircraft, she could see news vans already arriving at the airport. Word of the foiled hijacking was spreading fast, and she knew it would only be a matter of hours before her name and face were plastered across every news outlet in the country. But what bothered her most wasn't the loss of privacy or the unwanted attention. It was the fact that the hijackers had been remarkably well-prepared and well-armed. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment crime or a desperate act by amateurs. Someone had planned this carefully, which meant there might be others out there with similar intentions. The FBI interview room at Denver International Airport was sterile and windowless, designed to make subjects uncomfortable and talkative. Special Agent Walsh sat across from Sarah with a thick file and a digital recorder, her expression professionally neutral. "Before we begin," Walsh said, "I want you to know that preliminary interviews with passengers and crew have been interesting. Multiple witnesses describe your actions as professional, military-like, and impossibly skilled. Care to explain that?" Sarah had spent the last hour deciding how much to reveal. She could stick to basics, claim self-defense, and lucky reflexes. Or she could tell the truth and accept the consequences. Looking at Agent Walsh's intelligent eyes, she realized that half-truths would only delay the inevitable. "My name is Sarah Elena Martinez. I served 8 years in the United States Army, the last 5 with the 75th Ranger Regiment and Special Operations Forces. I separated from a military 5 years ago and have been working as a commercial flight attendant since then. Agent Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly. Special operations. That explains a few things. What was your MOS? 35F, intelligence analyst, but I was cross-trained in various combat specialties. Marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, hostage rescue, counterterrorism operations. Sarah paused, then added, I was deployed to Afghanistan 3 times and Iraq once. And you left all that to become a flight attendant? I wanted a normal life. No more violence. No more danger. No more having to hurt people. I thought serving coffee and checking seatbelts would be peaceful. Walsh made notes in her file. Tell me about tonight. Walk me through everything from when you first noticed something was wrong. Sarah provided a detailed account of the hijacking, from her initial suspicions about the 3 passengers to the final takedown in the cockpit. She held nothing back, describing her tactical decisions, her assessment of threats, her use of force. The passenger in 18A, Walsh said, consulting her notes. You said his reconnaissance of the cabin first caught your attention. What specifically did you observe? He was mapping exits, counting crew members, timing our service patterns. His scan wasn't random. It was systematic, professional. Same with the others. They positioned themselves to control key areas of the aircraft. They had timing, coordination, and they moved with military precision. Military precision? Someone trained these men. This wasn't 3 guys with guns trying to rob passengers or make a political statement. This was a coordinated operation with specific tactical objectives. Agent Walsh leaned forward. What do you think their objective was? Sarah had been thinking about this since the moment she first engaged the hijackers. I don't know, but I don't think they intended to land the plane. Their positioning, their coordination, the fact that they didn't seem interested in negotiations, it feels like a suicide mission. You think they were planning to crash the aircraft? It's possible. Or maybe they were planning to use it as a weapon against a ground target. Without more intelligence about who they are and who sent them, it's hard to say. Agent Walsh was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. Ms. Martinez, I'm going to be frank with you. What you did tonight was extraordinary. You saved the lives of everyone on that aircraft. But your background and the circumstances of this attack raise some questions. What kind of questions? The kind that make my superiors very interested in talking to you. We're dealing with a sophisticated terrorist cell, possibly with international connections. We could use someone with your skills and experience. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had left the military precisely to avoid this kind of conversation. Agent Walsh, with all due respect, I'm a flight attendant. I just want to go home and forget this ever happened. I don't think that's going to be possible. This story is already breaking on the news networks. You're about to become very famous, and that fame is going to make you a target for anyone connected to tonight's attackers. Through the small window in the interview room, Sarah could see the flashing lights of news trucks in the airport parking lot. Her old life was officially over, and she had no idea what would come next. So what happens now? She asked. Agent Walsh closed her file and leaned back in her chair. Now we try to figure out who those 3 men were and who sent them. And we try to keep you alive while we do it. 3 days after Flight 447 made its emergency landing in Denver, Sarah Martinez found herself living in a world she no longer recognized. Her small Chicago apartment was under surveillance. News vans camped outside her building, and her phone rang constantly with interview requests from reporters around the globe. The quiet life she had carefully constructed had vanished overnight. The headlines were everywhere. Hero flight attendant saves 150 lives. Former Special Forces operative prevents mid-air catastrophe. The Sky Warrior in a service uniform. Photos of her in military dress uniform had somehow been obtained and were plastered across front pages alongside images of her in her Midwest Airlines uniform. Sarah sat in a temporary FBI safe house in downtown Denver, watching the news coverage with a mixture of fascination and horror. The three hijackers have been identified as members of an international terror network with cells operating across multiple countries. What she had prevented wasn't just a hijacking. It was a coordinated attack plan to coincide with other operations that the FBI was now frantically trying to uncover. The analysis of their phones and laptops has been illuminating, Agent Walsh said, entering the room with fresh coffee and a stack of files. These weren't lone wolves. They were part of something much bigger. Sarah muted the television and turned her attention to Walsh. Over the past few days, the FBI agent had become something of an ally, one of the few people who seemed to understand Sarah's reluctance to embrace her newfound notoriety. How much bigger? Sarah asked. We've identified at least 12 other individuals in the United States who were in contact with your three hijackers. Phone intercepts suggest they were planning simultaneous attacks on multiple aircraft departing from major hubs: Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, New York. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Simultaneous attacks. It appears Flight 447 was meant to be part of a coordinated strike. If they had succeeded, if you hadn't been on that plane— Walsh shook her head. The death toll could have been in the thousands. The weight of that revelation settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She had thought she was just dealing with a random hijacking, a terrible but isolated incident. Now she was learning that her split-second decisions had potentially prevented a terrorist attack on the scale of September 11th. There's something else, Walsh continued. The leader of this network, a man named Khalil Nasser, has put out a bounty on your head. $1 million to anyone who can deliver you to him alive. Sarah's military training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, security protocols, escape routes. How reliable is this intelligence? Very. We intercepted the communication yesterday. Nasser considers you a direct threat to his organization's future operations. He wants to make an example of you. So what are my options? Walsh sat down across from her. Officially, we can offer you protective custody. New identity, relocation, constant security detail. You'd essentially disappear, but you'd be safe. And unofficially, there's another option. One that would allow you to help us take down Nasser's entire network while using your unique skills and experience. Sarah had been expecting this conversation since the night of the hijacking. The FBI, CIA, and probably half a dozen other agencies wanted to recruit her back into the world she had tried so hard to leave behind. You want me to go undercover? We want you to be yourself. Sarah Martinez, the flight attendant who became a hero. The woman who single-handedly prevented a terrorist attack. Nasser's people will be watching you. Try to find a way to get close. We could use that attention to our advantage. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy Denver street below. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware of how close they had come to experiencing a national tragedy. She thought about the elderly couple on Flight 447, about the family with young children, about all the innocent people who were alive because she had been in the right place at the right time. What exactly would this operation involve? We've been monitoring Nasser's communications. He's planning something big for New Year's Eve, less than 3 months away. Multiple cities, multiple targets, designed to cause maximum psychological impact and economic disruption. And you think I can help stop it? I think you're the only person who can get close enough to Nasser to stop it. His obsession with you, his need for revenge, makes him vulnerable. We can use that. Sarah turned back to face Walsh. What makes you think he'll come after me personally instead of just sending more hired killers? Because you didn't just foil his operation. You humiliated him. According to our intelligence, Nasser had been planning this coordinated attack for over 2 years. He'd invested enormous resources, recruited and trained dozens of operatives, coordinated with cells across multiple countries. And one woman with military training brought it all crashing down. The phone on the table buzzed with an incoming call. Walsh glanced at it and frowned. It's the director. I need to take this. While Walsh stepped into the hallway to take her call, Sarah found herself thinking about her former Army colleagues, the men and women she had served with in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many of them were still fighting, still putting their lives on the line to protect innocent people. She had thought she was done with that fight, but maybe the fight wasn't done with her. Walsh returned, looking grim. That was about the other cells we've been tracking. 3 of them have gone dark in the last 24 hours. Either they've been activated for an immediate operation, or they've realized we're onto them and they're running. Which means we might not have until New Year's Eve to stop whatever NASA is planning. We might have days, or even hours. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with imminent danger. It was a feeling she had thought she'd left behind, but now it felt almost comforting. At least when she was in danger, she knew exactly what she was supposed to do. If I agree to help you, what kind of support would I have? Full resources of the FBI, CIA, NSA, and any other agencies we need to bring in. Round-the-clock surveillance, tactical teams standing by, real-time intelligence analysis. You wouldn't be going in alone, but I would be going in as bait. Yes, essentially, you would be bait, but bait with bite. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options, a new identity and a quiet life in witness protection or a return to the dangerous world of counterterrorism operations. Safety or the chance to prevent another catastrophic attack. The decision was easier than she expected. What do you need me to do? Walsh smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. First, we need you to go public. Television interviews, newspaper features, maybe even a book deal. We need to make you visible, attractive as a target. That goes against every survival instinct I have. I know, but it's the only way to draw Nasser out. He won't be able to resist coming after you personally. Over the next week, Sarah found herself thrust into a media circus that felt more surreal than any combat mission she had ever undertaken. Television interviews with major networks, photo shoots for magazine covers, appearances on talk shows where hosts treated her like a celebrity rather than a soldier who had simply done her job. The attention was overwhelming and exhausting, but Sarah could see its strategic value. Every interview was being monitored by intelligence agencies around the world. Every photo was being analyzed by facial recognition software. Every public appearance was carefully choreographed to send specific signals to Nasser and his network. During a particularly revealing interview with a major news network, Sarah made comments that were designed to provoke a response from her target. "I've been a soldier for most of my adult life," she told the interviewer. "I've seen what happens when good people do nothing in the face of evil. Those 3 men on Flight 447 thought they could intimidate innocent families, thought they could murder children and grandparents to make some twisted political point. They were wrong." The interviewer, a seasoned journalist named Patricia Collins, leaned forward with interest. "Some critics have said your response was excessive, that you could have tried to negotiate with the hijackers instead of engaging in violence." Negotiate. Sarah's voice carried an edge that made Collins sit back slightly. These weren't men interested in negotiation. They were killers, and the only language killers understand is force. If there are other terrorists watching this interview, if there are other cowards planning to hurt innocent people, I want them to know something very clearly. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes hard and uncompromising. "I'm still here. I'm still watching. And if you think what happened on Flight 447 was impressive, you haven't seen anything yet." The interview aired that evening and was rebroadcast around the world. Intelligence agencies monitoring terrorist communications reported a spike in chatter within hours of its airing. Nasser's network was definitely paying attention. 2 days later, Sarah was leaving a bookstore in downtown Chicago where she had done a signing for the hastily written account of the hijacking, when her FBI security detail noticed something wrong. A man in a dark jacket had been following her for the past 3 blocks, staying just close enough to maintain visual contact, but far enough away to avoid detection. "We've got a tail." Agent Walsh's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, dark jacket, moving parallel to your position on the opposite side of the street. Sarah resisted the urge to look around for her follower. "Orders. Continue your normal routine. We want to see what he does, who he reports to. Team 2 is moving to a flanking position now." Sarah entered a small cafe and ordered coffee, using the opportunity to scan the street through the window. She spotted her tail immediately. He was good, but not good enough to avoid detection by someone with her training. He had positioned himself at a bus stop with a clear view of the cafe entrance. "He's professional," she reported through her earpiece. "Military bearing, tactical positioning. This isn't some amateur hired off the street. Copy that. We're running facial recognition now." Sarah spent 20 minutes in the cafe, reading a newspaper and projecting the image of someone with no awareness of being followed. When she finally left, the man fell in behind her again, maintaining his careful distance. 3 blocks later, as Sarah turned a corner onto a quieter residential street, her follower made his move. Instead of maintaining surveillance distance, he began closing the gap rapidly. Sarah's training told her that surveillance had just turned into an attack. "Contact imminent," she reported calmly. Moving to defensive position, the man was 15 feet behind her when Sarah spun around to face him directly. The movement caught him off guard, and she could see his hand moving toward what was probably a concealed weapon. "FBI, drop your weapon and get on the ground." Agent Walsh and her team emerged from their concealed positions, surrounding the man with drawn guns. For a moment, the street was frozen in tableau. Then, the man smiled, reached into his jacket, and Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Not a gun, but a dead man's switch connected to what looked like a suicide vest. "Allahu Akbar," he shouted, and Sarah realized that this wasn't an attempt to kidnap her. It was an assassination attempt designed to take out as many people as possible, including the FBI team protecting her. Time slowed to a crawl as Sarah's combat training took over completely. She could see Agent Walsh starting to dive for cover, could see pedestrians beginning to react to the shouting, could see the bomber's thumb moving toward the trigger of his device. Sarah moved faster than she had ever moved in her life, covering the 15 feet between her and the bomber in a heartbeat. Her tackle sent both of them crashing to the sidewalk, but more importantly, it knocked his hand away from the trigger. The fight that followed was desperate and violent. The bomber was strong and determined to complete his mission, while Sarah was equally determined to prevent him from taking innocent lives. They rolled across the concrete, each trying to gain control of the dead man's switch. Finally, Sarah managed to get her forearm across the bomber's throat, cutting off his air supply. As he lost consciousness, his grip on the trigger device relaxed, and Sarah carefully pulled it away from his limp hand. "Bomb disposal now," she shouted to the FBI team as she secured the unconscious terrorist. As the area was evacuated and bomb disposal experts moved in to disarm the device, Sarah found herself sitting on the curb, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. Agent Walsh sat down beside her. "That was too close," Walsh said quietly. "Yeah," Sarah agreed. "But now we know for sure that Nasser is serious about killing me, which means our plan is working. Are you sure you want to continue with this? After today, no one would blame you for taking the witness protection option." Sarah looked at the bomb disposal team, carefully removing the explosive vest from the unconscious terrorist, thought about the families walking down this street just minutes before, thought about the children playing in nearby parks. "I'm sure," she said firmly, "but I want to make one change to the plan." "What kind of change?" "Instead of waiting for Nasser to come to me, I want to go to him." The plan that emerged from the FBI's crisis meeting was audacious, dangerous, and completely dependent on Sarah's ability to convince some of the world's most sophisticated terrorists that she was something she wasn't. Agent Walsh had spent 2 days arguing with her superiors about the feasibility of the operation, but the intelligence they had gathered from the captured bomber had changed everything. Under interrogation, the suicide bomber had revealed that Nasser's New Year's Eve attack was even more ambitious than they had suspected. Coordinated strikes on Times Square, the Las Vegas Strip, Disney World, and the Golden Gate Bridge were planned to occur simultaneously, designed to cripple American tourism and create a climate of fear that would last for years. More importantly, the bomber had confirmed that Nasser himself would be in the United States to personally oversee the operation. He was currently believed to be in a compound in rural Montana, protected by a small army of loyal fighters, and enough explosives to level a city block. The problem is access, Agent Walsh explained during the briefing. Nasser's compound is essentially a fortress. We could assault it with a full tactical team, but the chances of taking him alive are minimal. And we need him alive to extract information about other cells operating worldwide. Sarah studied the satellite photos of the Montana compound spread across the conference table. High walls, guard towers, multiple buildings connected by underground tunnels. It looked like something designed to withstand a siege. How many people does he have up there? Best estimate is 15 to 20 highly trained fighters. All of them veterans of conflicts in Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. All of them completely loyal to Nasser and his cause. And you want me to just walk in there and ask for a meeting? Not exactly, Walsh said, pulling out another file. We want you to be captured. The silence in the room was profound as Sarah processed this information. Explain. Our intelligence suggests that Nasser has been frustrated by his inability to get close to you. The bomber was supposed to be just the first of several attempts. If we can make it appear that one of his teams has successfully captured you, he'll want to interrogate me personally before killing me. Exactly. It would be the ultimate prize for him. The woman who destroyed his careful plans, delivered directly to his compound for whatever revenge he wants to take. Sarah looked around the room at the assembled federal agents and analysts. They were all watching her carefully, waiting to see if she would agree to what amounted to a suicide mission with extra steps. What kind of support would I have inside the compound? That's the challenging part, Walsh admitted. We can't risk putting other agents inside without compromising the operation. You'd be going in alone, with only whatever equipment we can conceal on your person. So I'd be completely isolated, surrounded by 20 armed terrorists with no backup, hoping that I can somehow take down their leader and escape before they figure out it's a trap. When you put it like that, it does sound rather impossible. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the tactical challenges. The compound's isolation meant no immediate rescue was possible. The number of defenders made a frontal assault unlikely to succeed, and Nasser's paranoia meant he would probably have her thoroughly search for weapons or tracking devices. But there was one advantage she might have that the FBI planners hadn't considered. Nasser and his men expected certain things from their enemies. They expected government agents who followed rules, who tried to minimize casualties, who operated within legal constraints. They didn't expect a woman who had spent years learning to kill efficiently and who was perfectly willing to do whatever was necessary to complete her mission. I'll need complete autonomy once I'm inside, Sarah said finally. No communications, no attempted rescue operations, no interference from outside agencies. If this is going to work, I need to be free to use my own judgment about how to handle the situation. Walsh looked uncomfortable. That's a lot of authority to give someone who technically isn't even a federal agent. It's the only way this works. Nasser will be monitoring all communications in and out of that compound. The moment he detects any federal presence, he'll either kill me immediately or disappear again. If you want him, you have to trust me to get him. And if something goes wrong, if you're captured for real and can't complete the mission. Sarah thought about the passengers on Flight 447, about the families who would be visiting Times Square on New Year's Eve, about all the innocent people who would die if Nasser's plan succeeded. Then, you'd better hope your tactical team is ready for a very difficult assault. The capture operation was staged 3 days later in downtown Seattle, where Sarah was supposedly doing another round of media interviews. The FBI had leaked information about her schedule to sources they suspected were connected to Nasser's network, ensuring that the terrorist organization would know exactly where to find her. Sarah walked out of the hotel where she had just completed a television interview, her FBI protection detail maintaining their usual positions around her. What they didn't know was that half of those agents were actually CIA operatives playing the role of Nasser's kidnapping team. The fake attack was choreographed to look convincing to any observers. The terrorists struck just as Sarah was getting in her vehicle, using flashbang grenades to create confusion and overwhelm her FBI escorts. In the chaos, she was dragged into a waiting van and driven away at high speed. To anyone watching, including legitimate FBI agents who hadn't been briefed on the operation, it looked like a professional kidnapping. News reports within hours were confirming that the hero flight attendant had been captured by unknown assailants. The drive to Montana took 14 hours, with Sarah spending most of it genuinely restrained in the back of the van. The CIA operatives playing her captors had to make the journey look authentic, which meant treating her roughly enough to leave convincing marks without actually injuring her. When they finally arrive at the compound, Sarah was exhausted, dirty, and uncomfortable, exactly how a real kidnap victim would look. The guards who met them at the gate examined her carefully before allowing the van to pass through the compound's outer defenses. The compound was even more impressive in person than it had appeared in the satellite photos. High concrete walls topped with razor wire enclosed several buildings connected by covered walkways. Guard towers provided overlapping fields of fire, and she could see the muzzles of heavy machine guns positioned to repel any assault. Sarah was dragged from a van and marched through a courtyard toward the central building. The men handling her were professionals, alert, disciplined, and clearly experienced in dealing with prisoners. She counted at least 12 guards visible in the courtyard, with probably more inside the buildings. The interior of the main building was surprisingly sophisticated. Instead of the crude terrorist hideout she had expected, she found herself in what looked like a military command center. Banks of computers lined the walls, satellite communication equipment hummed quietly in corners, and multiple screens displayed what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations around the country. And standing in the center of it all was a man she recognized from FBI briefing photos, Khalil Nasser. He was smaller than she had expected, perhaps 5 feet 8 inches tall, with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes. But there was something about his presence that filled the room, a sense of controlled violence that reminded Sarah of the most dangerous men she had encountered in combat. "Sarah Martinez," he said in accented but perfect English. "The famous flight attendant who thinks she is a warrior." Sarah said nothing, playing the role of a defiant but helpless captive. She let her eyes show fear while her mind cataloged everything she could see: guard positions, equipment locations, potential weapons, escape routes. "You have caused me considerable inconvenience," Nasser continued, walking in a slow circle around her. 2 years of planning, millions of dollars in resources, dozens of trained operatives, all undone by one woman with military training who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "We're the right place at the right time," Sarah said quietly. Nasser's hand moved like lightning, striking her across the face hard enough to snap her head sideways. "You will speak when spoken to. For now, your only purpose is to answer my questions." Sarah tasted blood from her split lip, but kept her expression neutral. The blow had been designed to establish dominance, to remind her that she was completely at his mercy. What Nasser didn't know was that she had been hit much harder by much stronger men and had still found ways to kill them. "Take her to the holding room," Nasser ordered. "I want her cleaned up and ready for questioning in 1 hour. And search her thoroughly." I assume the FBI was foolish enough to give her some sort of tracking device or weapon. Sarah was escorted to a small concrete room with no windows and a single metal door. The search that followed was professional and invasive, but the guards found nothing because there was nothing to find. The FBI had agreed that any concealed equipment would be discovered immediately, so Sarah was going into this operation with nothing but her training and her wits. Alone in the cell, she began her own reconnaissance. The walls were solid concrete, too thick to break through without heavy equipment. The door was steel with no visible hinges on her side. There was a small ventilation grate near the ceiling, but it was far too small for a person to fit through. But what interested her most was what she could hear through the walls. Footsteps, conversations in multiple languages, the sound of equipment being moved around. The compound was busy, which meant people were focused on their tasks rather than watching for threats. An hour later, as promised, Sarah was brought back to the command center. Nasser was waiting for her, along with two other men who had the look of experienced interrogators. The room had been cleared of everyone else, leaving just the four of them. "Now, then," Nasser said, settling into a chair across from her. "Let's discuss what you're going to do for me." "I'm not going to do anything for you." "Oh, but you are." "You see, I have decided that simply killing you would be wasteful. You have skills that could be useful to our cause, and you have a reputation that could be leveraged to our advantage." Sarah kept her expression carefully neutral, but her mind was racing. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a choice. You can die here, slowly and painfully, as an example to anyone who opposes us. Or you can live and work for us, using your military training and your newfound fame to help us achieve our objectives. You're insane if you think I would ever help you." Nasser smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think you will find my persuasion techniques quite effective. But first, let me show you what you would be helping to prevent." He nodded to one of his men, who activated a large wall-mounted screen. Surveillance footage began playing, showing what appeared to be a suburban house surrounded by FBI vehicles. "This footage was taken 6 hours ago," Nasser explained. "That house belongs to your former Army unit commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson. The FBI has placed him and his family in protective custody, believing that I might try to use them as leverage against you." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the house, and the man being escorted to an unmarked van. Patterson had been her commanding officer during her final deployment to Afghanistan, and she had remained close to his family even after leaving the service. "Here's what's going to happen," Nasser continued. "You're going to call Colonel Patterson and tell him to dismiss his FBI protection. You're going to convince him that you've escaped and that the threat to his family is over. And then my people are going to visit his house." "No." "Yes. Because if you don't, I'm going to have you killed immediately, and then I'm going to have his wife and children killed anyway. At least this way, you have a chance to save them." Sarah stared at the screen, watching Patterson's two young daughters being loaded into the FBI van. They were 8 and 10 years old, innocent children who'd done nothing more than have the misfortune of being connected to someone who had once served with Sarah. "You're bluffing. You don't have people in position to attack a house under FBI protection." Nasser's smile widened. "Watch the screen." The surveillance footage shifted to a different angle, and Sarah could see a man in FBI tactical gear standing near one of the protective vehicles. As she watched, the man turned slightly toward the camera and gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Agent Marcus Webb, FBI hostage rescue team," Nasser said conversationally. "He's been working for me for over a year. Right now, he's in position to eliminate Colonel Patterson's entire family and their protection detail." Sarah felt a crushing weight settle over her chest. Everything had gone wrong. The operation was compromised. Patterson's family was in immediate danger, and she was trapped in a concrete room with no way to warn anyone. "What do you want me to do?" "For now, nothing. I want you to sit here and think about the choices you're facing. Tomorrow, we'll discuss how you're going to help me complete my New Year's Eve operation." Sarah was returned to her cell, but this time her mind wasn't focused on escape plans. Instead, she was thinking about Patterson's daughters, about the corrupted FBI agent who could kill them at any moment, about the thousands of innocent people who would die if Nasser's attack succeeded. She had been trained to accept that some missions couldn't be completed, that sometimes the only choice was to minimize casualties rather than achieve victory. But this wasn't one of those times. Too many lives were at stake, and she was the only person in position to stop what was coming, which meant she was going to have to do something that went against every instinct she had developed over 8 years of military service. She was going to have to stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like a terrorist. If she was going to save Patterson's family and prevent Nasser's attacks, she was going to have to become someone capable of the kind of violence that would shock even hardened terrorists. She was going to have to become the most dangerous person in the compound. Starting tonight, Sarah spent her first night in the concrete cell memorizing every sound, every footstep, every voice that echoed through the compound. By dawn, She had constructed a detailed mental map of the building's layout, identified at least 3 guard rotation patterns, and pinpointed the locations of the communications equipment that connected Nasser to his corrupt FBI agent. The key to everything was timing. Agent Webb wouldn't act against Patterson's family unless he received a specific signal from Nasser. That signal would come through the compound's communications array, which meant Sarah had to disable it before Nasser could give the order. But first, she had to get out of her cell. The guards brought her breakfast at 0700 hours. 2 men, both armed, both professional in their approach, but not particularly alert. They had been told she was a flight attendant with some military training, not a special operations soldier with 8 years of experience in close-quarters combat. Their casual attitude would be their downfall. When the door opened, Sarah was sitting in the corner with her back to the wall, projecting the image of a defeated prisoner. The first guard entered with a food tray, while the second remained in the doorway, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Eat," the first guard said in broken English, setting the tray on the floor near her feet. "Boss wants to see you in 1 hour." Sarah nodded meekly and reached for the tray. As her fingers closed around the metal cup of coffee, she was already calculating angles and force vectors. The cup was heavy enough to do damage, and the hot liquid inside would provide an additional weapon. Her attack was sudden and devastating. The coffee cup caught the first guard in the temple, dropping him instantly. Sarah was already moving as he fell, using his body as a shield while she closed the distance to the second guard. Her hand clamped over his mouth as her other arm went around his throat, cutting off his air supply with precision learned from years of training. Within 30 seconds, both guards were unconscious, and she was armed with their weapons and equipment. More importantly, she now had their radio, which gave her access to the compound's internal communications. Moving quickly, Sarah dragged the bodies in her cell and stripped the first guard of his clothing. The uniform was too large for her, but it would provide enough camouflage to get her through the compound's corridors without immediate detection. The compound was laid out like a military installation, with clear lines of sight and overlapping security zones. Sarah moved through it like a ghost, using her knowledge of tactical positioning to avoid the camera blind spots she had identified from the command center. Her first objective was the communications room. Disabling Nasser's ability to contact Agent Webb would buy Patterson's family crucial time and force Nasser to reveal more of his operational capabilities. The communications room was located on the second floor of the main building, protected by a single guard who was more interested in a handheld video game than watching for internal threats. Sarah approached from his blind side, moving with the silent precision that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments. The guard never saw her coming. One moment he was focused on his game, the next he was unconscious on the floor with Sarah dragging him into a supply closet. She quickly disabled the primary communications array, destroying several key components that would take hours to repair. But as she worked, Sarah could hear voices approaching from the corridor. Her absence had been discovered earlier than expected, which meant the compound would be going into lockdown within minutes. Moving to the window, Sarah looked out over the compound's courtyard and felt her heart sink. Guards were already taking defensive positions around the perimeter, and she could see men with assault rifles moving toward the main building. Escape was no longer an option. She was trapped inside with 20 armed terrorists who now knew they had an active threat in their midst, which meant her mission had changed from rescue and escape to something much more direct. Sarah made her way through the building's corridors, using her stolen radio to monitor the guards' communications. They were conducting a systematic search, room by room, floor by floor. Soon they would corner her, and when that happened, she needed to be in a position to do maximum damage to their operations. The building's floor plan led her toward what appeared to be Nasser's private office, located in the most secure section of the compound. If she was going to take down the terrorist leader, this was where she would find him. But as she approached the office, Sarah realized she had walked into a trap. The corridor was too quiet, the security too light. Nasser was expecting her. She found him waiting in his office, sitting calmly behind a large desk with his hands visible and empty. But Sarah could see the subtle bulge under his jacket that indicated a concealed weapon, and her trained eyes picked out at least 2 other armed men positioned in the room's corners. "Ms. Martinez," Nasser said pleasantly, "I was wondering when you would join me. Please come in and close the door behind you." Sarah entered the room with the captured assault rifle held ready, her eyes constantly moving to track all potential threats. "Your communications are down. Agent Webb won't be receiving any orders from you. Agent Webb doesn't need orders from me to eliminate Colonel Patterson's family. His instructions were quite clear. If he loses contact with his compound for more than 4 hours, he is to assume we have been compromised and act accordingly." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized the trap she had fallen into. By cutting Nasser's communications, she had triggered the very scenario she was trying to prevent. "Of course, I could re-establish communications and call off Agent Webb," Nasser continued. "But that would require your cooperation. What do you want?" "I want you to help me complete my New Year's Eve operation. Your reputation as the hero flight attendant would be invaluable for getting my people close to their targets, who would suspect the woman who stopped one terrorist attack of facilitating another." Sarah's mind raced through the tactical situation. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a room with no easy exits. But she also had advantages that Nasser couldn't see. Her years of special operations training, her willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent lives, and her complete lack of concern for her own survival. "If I agree to help you, how do I know you won't kill Patterson's family anyway?" "You don't, but you know with certainty that they will die if you don't cooperate." Sarah appeared to consider this, letting her shoulders slump as if accepting defeat. But she was actually calculating distances and identifying weapons. The letter opener on Nasser's desk could serve as an improvised knife. The heavy glass paperweight could disable the guard to her left. The lamp cord could be used for strangulation. "All right," she said finally, "I'll help you. But I want to speak to Agent Webb myself to confirm that Patterson's family is safe." Nasser smiled and reached for his satellite phone. "Of course. I want you to understand exactly what's at stake." As he began to dial, Sarah made her move. The assault rifle was too unwieldy for close-quarters combat, so she dropped it and launched herself across the desk. Her target was the satellite phone. If she could destroy it before Nasser completed the call, she might still be able to save Patterson's family. The fight that followed was brutal and desperate. Nasser was faster than she had expected, and the 2 guards converged on her position with military precision. Sarah found herself fighting 3 men simultaneously in a space barely larger than her apartment back in Chicago. But she had spent 8 years learning to fight in exactly these conditions, outnumbered, outgunned, with everything on the line. Her training took over completely, turning her into a weapon more dangerous than any gun or knife. The first guard went down when Sarah drove her elbow into his solar plexus and followed up with a knee strike that left him gasping on the floor. The second guard managed to get his hands around her throat, but Sarah used his own momentum to throw him through the office window. That left just her and Nasser in a room now destroyed by violence. The terrorist leader had drawn his concealed pistol, but Sarah was already inside his effective range. Her hand clamped down on his wrist while her other hand drove toward his throat with killing force. For a moment, they were locked together in a deadly embrace, each trying to gain control of the weapon. Nasser was strong and well-trained, but Sarah had advantages he couldn't match: desperation, determination, and the knowledge that failure meant the death of innocent children. When the gun finally went off, Sarah wasn't sure who had pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and she felt Nasser's body go limp in her arms. Blood was spreading across his shirt, and his eyes were already losing focus. "The phone," she gasped, searching frantically for the satellite device. She found it smashed beneath Nasser's body, its screen dark and cracked. Without it, she had no way to contact Agent Webb, no way to prevent him from carrying out his orders. But as she knelt beside Nasser's dying body, she noticed something that changed everything. A small notebook that had fallen from his jacket, filled with handwritten notes in Arabic. And on the last page, clearly visible, was a phone number with the notation Web, emergency contact. Sarah grabbed the notebook and ran for the office door, only to find herself face to face with 6 armed guards. Behind them, she could hear more men entering the building, their voices raised in alarm as they responded to the gunshot. "Drop your weapon," the lead guard shouted in accented English. "Surrender now." Sarah looked at the men arrayed against her, at their assault rifles and tactical gear, at the certain death that awaited her if she gave up. Then she looked at the notebook in her hand and thought about Patterson's daughters. "No," she said quietly. The firefight that erupted in the corridor was intense but brief. Sarah used her knowledge of the building's layout to her advantage, ducking into doorways and using furniture as cover while she tried to reach the communications room. She needed to repair the equipment she had destroyed, needed to establish contact with the outside world before it was too late. Bullets chewed through drywall and shattered windows as the guards pursued her through the building. Sarah was hit twice, once in the shoulder and once in the thigh, but adrenaline and determination kept her moving forward. When she finally reached the communications room, she found it occupied by 2 technicians working to repair the damage she had caused. They looked up in shock as she burst through the door, blood-soaked and armed, more like an avenging angel than a flight attendant. "Fix it," she ordered, pointing her weapon at the senior technician. "Give me a line to the outside now." The technician's hands shook as he worked to bypass the damaged circuits. "It will take several minutes to establish a connection. You have 30 seconds, or I start shooting." The threat had the desired effect. The technician's fingers flew over the equipment, and within 20 seconds, Sarah heard the familiar tone of an active satellite connection. She dialed Agent Webb's emergency number from Nasser's notebook, praying that she wasn't already too late. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Webb, Agent Webb, this is Sarah Martinez. Do not harm Patterson's family. Nasser is dead, and his operation is compromised." There's a long pause on the other end of the line. "How do I know this isn't a trick?" "Because I'm about to die in this compound, and the only thing that matters to me right now is saving those children. You can kill me later if you want, but don't hurt innocent people." Another pause, then, "Understood. The family is secure." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she hung up the phone. Patterson's daughters were safe, Nasser was dead, and his New Year's Eve operation would die with him. She had completed her mission, even if it had cost her everything else. The guards were already breaking down the door to the communications room. Sarah could hear their voices, their footsteps, the sound of weapons being prepared. In a few seconds, they would storm in and kill her, but it no longer mattered. She had been a soldier, a flight attendant, and, finally, a hero. She had saved Flight 447, prevented a national catastrophe, and protected the innocent children of a friend. It was enough. But as the door exploded inward and armed men poured into the room, Sarah heard something unexpected, the sound of helicopters approaching from the distance. Multiple helicopters flying low and fast with the distinctive rotor signature of military aircraft. The FBI tactical team that crashed through the compound's defenses 15 minutes later found Sarah unconscious, but alive in the communications room, surrounded by the bodies of 6 guards who had underestimated her one final time. The compound's surviving defenders had surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming federal firepower. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez sat in a quiet restaurant in downtown Washington, D.C., across from Agent Jennifer Walsh. Her shoulder was still healing from the bullet wound, and she walked with a slight limp that doctors said would be permanent. But she was alive, and Patterson's family was safe, and Nasser's network had been completely dismantled. "So what's next for you?" Walsh asked over coffee that tasted infinitely better than anything served at 35,000 feet. "I've been thinking about that," Sarah replied. "Midwest Airlines has offered to reinstate me with a promotion and a substantial raise. They think having the hero flight attendant back on their roster would be good for business. But I'm not sure I want to go back to serving coffee and checking seatbelts. This whole experience has reminded me that I have skills, that I can make a difference in ways that go beyond ensuring passengers have their tray tables in the upright position. Walsh smiled. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that maybe it's time for Sarah Martinez to stop running from who she is. Maybe it's time to embrace both parts of her identity, the soldier and the flight attendant, the warrior and the caregiver. The FBI could always use someone with your particular combination of skills. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about all the innocent people who were alive because she had been in the right place at the right time with the right training. Then, she thought about all the other innocent people who might need someone like her in the future. When do I start? Outside the restaurant. Normal people went about their normal lives, unaware that they were safer because of a woman who had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought by those who appear least prepared to fight them. Sarah Martinez, former flight attendant, former soldier, and now federal agent, watched them through the window and smiled. She was exactly where she belonged.